And Dr. Schuler, if you want to go ahead and offer some welcoming remarks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for giving up some of your evening to spend a little bit of time with us. If you had an opportunity to join us for our first session with Dr. Bolton, welcome back. We're sure glad to have you back with us. If you did not have the opportunity to join the first one and you're here with us for the first time tonight. Again, a sincere welcome, and again, a thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. So we are pleased to welcome back Dr. Doug Bolton. Dr. Bolton did a session a couple of weeks ago for us, really on just the whole topic of resilience, and is back with us tonight to continue in that series, talk a little bit more about the topic of stress. And so we sure are glad to have him join us. Just a quick intro for Dr. Bolton, and I'm going to let him get started tonight. Doug Bolton is a clinical psychologist with formative psychological services in Northbrook and Chicago. He spent his career working in schools, first as a school psychologist and most recently as the principal of North Shore Academy, a therapeutic school in Highland Park. Currently, he has a private practice and consults to schools to support the healthy emotional development of students. And so without further ado, Dr. Bolton, welcome back, and the floor is yours.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Dr. Schuler. It's really so nice to be back. You know, the neat thing, I think, and I think it's really progressive. This is a talk, part two of a talk that I also gave to the staff in the district. And I think it's really important when staff and parents can be learning together. But this is how do we build resilience? And in this case, today, we're going to take a deep dive into stress. And one of the things, you know, that I saw that resonated with me was this. Can we all agree that in 2015, not a single person got the answer correct to where do you see yourself 5 years from now? I certainly had no clue. Bill Gates, I think, predicted it at one point, but I certainly didn't see this coming. But by 8 o'clock, the good news is the fact that you're here. I think by 8 o'clock, I will have increased your life expectancy by 43% and given you the tools to decrease your anxiety and depression by about 2/3. So that's not bad for an hour's time, right? We'll see how I do. And in the process, you'll have the tools to be able to have a greater sense of power and pride and strength and pain tolerance and self-control and empathy and connection. So we'll see how it goes. Last time we talked about how do we understand and cope with stress, and today we're really going to talk about how do we find meaning in stress, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into stress because it's there's some complexity to it that I think is important for us to understand. And then finally, how do we endure in this race that we really don't know how long it lasts? And all I'm going to ask you to do, I want you guys to try something new. I'm going to try this. I've not done this with parents. I've done it with staff. I'm going to do a couple things with you guys tonight that I haven't done with a parent group. So I'm hoping you'll jump in and try with me. And I'd love you to find a pen and paper as we get started, something to write with, and you'll find out why in a little bit. All right, so here's the first thing. I'm going to share this with you because it works. And it's something that it's hard to wrap our heads around, but I guess I want to take a moment and do a quick 1-minute mindfulness activity. So what I want you to do is think about, notice how your body feels right now. I'm going to do an activity that's called eye palming. And what I want you to do is sit now with your feet flat on the floor. And I want you to straighten your back and close your eyes. Now I want you to bring your palms together in front of your chest and start rubbing them together quickly. Listen to the sound of your hands rubbing together. Feel the heat and energy in your palms. Keep rubbing your palms together. Rub your palms together even faster. Keep your palms together, but stop rubbing. Now cup your hands and gently place your palms over your eyes with your fingertips resting at the top of your forehead. And notice the warmth and darkness. Feel your eyes relax. Feel your forehead relax. Feel your cheeks relax. Relax your entire face. Slowly lower your hands and rest them in your lap. Take a deep breath in and hold. And exhale slowly. Then notice how you feel now. Slowly open your eyes. For most people, it's pretty amazing how 40 seconds of an activity can completely shift how they feel in their bodies. And this also is something that helps us begin to be able to engage in learning. It helps us to engage in being able to listen in hard conversation. So these mindfulness activities don't take long, but they can be really powerful. And they're going to help us as we dive into stress. So if you had to sum up how you feel about stress, which statement would be more accurate? A, stress is harmful and should be avoided at all costs, or stress is helpful and should be accepted, utilized, and embraced? So they asked this question to thousands of Americans, and what they found is that 85% of Americans believe that stress has a negative impact on health, family life, and work. But here's the thing, in 1997, they asked 30,000 people these two questions. How much stress have you experienced in the last year? And do you believe that stress is harmful to your health? And then what they did was they watched to see how many people died in the 8 years following their answer to that question. And the results were pretty stunning. The bad news is that 8 years later, people in the high stress and stress is harmful condition, 43% of them, there was a 43% increased risk of dying, 43%. But the good news is that people in the stress isn't harmful condition, and it didn't matter whether it was high stress or low stress, had no increased risk of dying. They had an even lower risk than people who reported low stress, but that stress is harmful. And so what the stress researchers talk about is that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Believing that stress is helpful actually makes stress helpful. Our beliefs about stress are more important to our health than our actual stress. Now, why is that? And how could that be? The interesting thing is that when we believe that stress is helpful for us, it changes our bodies. It changes us at a blood vessel level. Take a look at the difference between a dilated blood vessel and a constricted blood vessel. When people who experience stress as being helpful, their blood vessels, even during stress, were dilated. On the other hand, people who experience stress as unhealthy and unhelpful, their blood vessels were dilated. This is the difference between having a heart attack at age 50 or living to age 90. Can you see how powerful this is? So now my goal is to figure out how can we help you actually believe that stress can be helpful. Kelly McGonigal, and a lot of this talk comes from her book, The Upside of Stress. I was thinking about a lot of different things. And then as I was diving into this, I realized there's so much here that's so good. She also has a TED Talk that's really good. So here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to think about a time in your life. There was a period of significant personal growth, a turning point that led to positive changes or a newly found purpose. And can you write it in the chat? Just whatever it may be. And Erica, can you just read out what some of these are?
Absolutely.
Thank you. What's a time of significant personal growth for you? A turning point that led to positive changes or a newly found purpose.
Having children, taking a new job, becoming a mom.
Yeah. Parenting, a lot of people will say parenting, new jobs.
Living abroad.
living abroad. I talked to somebody today, and what they said was that they cared for their critically ill child. There's so many of these in very different ways. And here's the thing about these. Thank you, Erica. Was it stressful? Living abroad is stressful. Being a parent is stressful. Caring for your sick child is stressful. Starting a new job is stressful, right? All of these things are stressful. Things that have meaning are stressful. And this is one of the most important things we can connect. Stress occurs when something we care about is at stake. If we don't care about these things, we don't experience stress, but stress is always about something that we care about. And there's the stress paradox, is that countries with the highest level of stress are also healthier and happier than countries with lower levels of stress. Like we talked about with parenting, raising children increases our daily stress. There's no question about it. But it also increases the number of times we smile and laugh, right? Entrepreneurs report high levels of stress and high levels of learning. Stress is an inevitable consequence of engaging in roles and pursuing goals that feed our sense of purpose. Feeling stressed is a barometer for how engaged you are in the activities and relationships that are personally meaningful to you and to me. This is what happens. These are the things that stress us out. And so as a result, meaning and stress are interwoven. They are inseparable. Parenting has never been more stressful than it has in COVID for many of us, for most of us, right? But it's also never been more meaningful. This is such an important time in our kids' lives. And so how do we cope with this? And so this is a part two. One of the things that we do, and I want you to break out your pencils if you can, please. I want you to try this. And this is just for your own learning. You won't need to share this with anybody. But writing about values is one of the most effective psychological interventions ever studied. Why not use this? Journaling, all of these things are incredibly powerful strategies for us. And so I just want you to take a couple minutes. And I want you to write a paragraph about the values that led you to choose to become a parent. So just take a couple of minutes. It can be bullet points if you want, but what are the values that led you to choose to become a parent? Then I want you to think about yesterday or think about today. Today is fine because it's late in the day. How did those values show up in your parenting? And just write a little bit about how those values, take a look at those values. How did those show up in how you parented during this time of COVID? So here's the thing. Writing about these values has a huge impact on our social and emotional functioning. One of the things, they did this with a study of Stanford students on their break, and they said writing about values, they asked some to write about what they did, and they asked others to write about how their values showed up in what they did. And there was a huge difference Writing about values helped students see meaning in their lives. Stressful experiences were no longer things to endure. They became an expression of the students' values. Going and picking up their sibling from soccer practice or running to the grocery store suddenly became consistent with their values about how they're contributing to their family, right? These are how we connect our stress to our values completely shifts how we experience that. And the interesting thing is the research is really clear about this. The short-term impact of writing about values like you did tonight can help you feel more powerful, more in control, prouder, and stronger. When they do this with students, they see an increased grade point average and improved health outcomes long-term. It's a very powerful intervention. And what it does is it connects our resilience to meaning in our lives, and our meaning is directly connected to our values. When we can get in touch with those things, the stress shifts, and we can change the meaning of our stress. And all of a sudden, we can experience resilience. All right, we're going to take a deeper dive into stress. We have three basic responses to stress, and we talked about one last time, and that was fight or flight. We spent a lot of time talking about fight or flight. But there's two others, and it's important for us to tease these apart. There's something called the challenge response, and another called the tend and befriend response. The fight or flight response is the one we talk about a lot. We are being chased by a grizzly bear, and everything in our body, our blood is pumping, our adrenaline is going, everything is happening, and we have remarkable physical response, strength and quickness. We've got a mental acuity, our eyes dilate so we can see things. We've got our senses are extremely active. We have a sense of confidence and power. This is what all of those, that physical response does for us. But there's another response, and that's called the challenge response. And that's when we get a jolt of energy from stress that helps us perform under pressure. Our heart rate and adrenaline spike, and we feel more focused but not fearful. And it helps us with engagement. And these increases in adrenaline improve performance under pressure as long as we have this mindset intervention, this shifted mindset that stress can be helpful. Recent research suggests that stress doesn't hurt performance on tests, and it can actually help performance. Simply remind yourself that your stress could be helping you do well. The research on this is really interesting. If you're anxious going into a test, if you're anxious for a job interview, if I'm anxious for public speaking, if I see that anxiety as, oh my gosh, I'm going to blow it and things are going to fall apart, I'll never get this job, we struggle. But if we say, this stress that I'm feeling is going to help me be more focused. It's going to help me be more present on this test, in this interview, in this talk. When I can change that, then all of a sudden we do better. And they've done this in all sorts of places. When it comes to performing under pressure, being stressed is better than being relaxed. And they looked at this with middle school, high school, and college student test scores. Armed services, special forces did better in these moments. Law enforcement and hostage situations did better, as long as they understood their stress as being helpful. And finally, so this one, the challenge response, is not that the grizzly bear is chasing you. This is when we're chasing the grizzly bear, right? So this is when we are after something that we want. We want to get a good grade on the test. We want to get that job. Tend and befriend is when we watch someone we care about being chased by a grizzly bear, right? This activates us to protect people that we care about, and it helps their stress and ours, and it enhances our connections. Here are just some of the things that it releases this miracle drug in our brains called oxytocin. It's a hormone that increases our empathy and intuition. We better understand others' thoughts and feelings. We're much more attuned to other people because these stressful moments, oxytocin is released. It dampens our fear response. We'll do anything to protect people that we care about and increases our courage. And it motivates us to connect to each other. And interestingly, because of all this stress gets damaged, oxytocin actually repairs our heart from this micro damage. All of these things happen. So here's the thing, we can choose. What we want to do is we want to notice what's happening in our body, and we want to think about what the situation is and what do we need right now. If we're at physical risk, then yes, fight or flight. Let's get out of here. Let's fight if we need to. Let's do what we need to do. But if we're anxious about a task, then that's a challenge response. And let's reframe that as this stress is going to help me be more focused. If we're worried about others, let's really embrace the idea that this stress is going to help me show up for the people I care about in this moment. And so what happens is our body learns and we learn. When the body recovers from stress, it's learning how to handle future stress. Expecting to learn from stress, as long as we can expect that, it can shift our physical stress response to actual inoculation. Stress becomes our vaccine against future stress. If we do this well, and if we help our kids do this well. So how do we respond to stress? Allow yourself, take a minute to notice the stress. We did that just briefly. What do you feel in your body? Remember before we did the mindfulness activity, right? Then welcome the stress, knowing that it's a response to something we care about, and it's going to help us. It's either going to help us fight something we need to fight. It's going to help us focus if we need to focus. It's going to help us care for the people we need to care about. Stress is helpful in these ways. Here's a real challenge for parents. You've had to work from home. You've had to help your kids learn from home. You had to deal with your own feelings about the pandemic. You may have had to care for your parents during the pandemic or your in-laws. In the field of therapy, we call this compassion fatigue. Mary Jo Barrett defines it. She's a social worker in Skokie. She's wonderful. She says, it's the exhaustion and subsequent symptoms that are the result of passionately, skillfully, and compassionately giving of yourself to others. And I can't think of a time when parents have been asked to give more to their kids. And when I was talking to the teachers, it's the same thing. Teachers have been asked to give more than they've ever to their students. And they're often trying to do this with their own kids to help teach their own kids at home. We are exhausted. So I want to talk about a University of Rochester School of Medicine study. This was pre-COVID, but they had doctors who were really, really stressed. They gave them an anxiety and depression scale, and the average score on that scale for people was 15. But for these doctors, it was more than double that. It was 33. And so what they thought was they were going to take this research and figure out how can we embrace rather than avoid the relationship between suffering and meaning. And what they wanted to do was to help these doctors to be fully present in the hardest moments and to create a community of other physicians who share and support this idea that this meaning-making mindset, which means thinking about stress through the lens of meaning. And so they did 3 simple things. They did a mindfulness exercise, just like we did. Then they had a story prompt, a little sentence starter. Then they had them write, just like I did with you guys. And then they shared their stories to find meaning in those stories. Here's some of the story prompts. What was a profound moment of caring for someone who is dying? What's a surprising clinical encounter that changed how you saw a patient? Describe mistakes or blame and forgiveness, whatever. These are some of the prompts, right? I think this can be done around the dinner table, to be honest with you. Maybe we don't do the writing piece, but as we're sitting around the table, can we begin having these discussions? What are some of the story prompts? How did you take care of someone else today? What was your biggest struggle today and how did you handle it? What is something that brightened your day? How do we help kids think about their values? Connect them to how they showed up today. I also believe that if you say grace around the dinner table, I think grace is a form of mindfulness. Are these ways that we can then begin, or before bedtime, can we make some of these things a practice? Because what happens is we think in stories and we try and make sense of the world by telling stories. And the more as families we can tell stories, the more we can begin to understand. So these doctors did this once a week for 2 months and then once a month for 10 months. Across a year, they did it 18 times. And look what happened. After just 8 weeks, their depression and anxiety score dropped from a 33 to a 15. Went right back to baseline, didn't it? And after a year, they were experiencing less stress than was the norm on this test. It's amazing what happens when we can connect stress to meaning in community with mindfulness. They also found that these doctors were more empathetic, less overwhelmed, more curious, less resentful, and more grateful. Pretty amazing research, right? When stress is intertwined with meaning, taking away the stress takes away the meaning. What we want to do is seeing stress as healthy and our suffering as having meaning. And through that, we and our children will grow. And one of the ways that we grow is through post-traumatic growth. We've talked a lot about post-traumatic stress, but there's a lot less spoken about post-traumatic growth. And it's powerful. People who experience adversity often see positive growth afterwards and a rise to a higher level of functioning. Jim Rendon says, a traumatic event, it turns out, is not simply a hardship to be overcome. Instead, it's transformative. It becomes a dividing line in people's lives. I think COVID's going to be a dividing line for us. Take a look at what happens, what the research says about people who experience post-traumatic growth. They leave this traumatic event with an increased inner strength, an openness to new possibilities in life, closer and often deeper relationships with friends and family, an enhanced appreciation for life, and a stronger sense of spirituality. These are just some of the things that happen. And here's the interesting thing. Even though we talk much more about post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth is more common than post-traumatic stress. Resilience, it turns out, is learned. When people are asked how they are coping with the biggest stresses in their lives, 82% say they're drawing on strength developed from past experiences. What's going to happen is kids are going to look back and they're going to draw strength from this time. We are going to draw strength from this time. This is the power. You can think of resilience as a set of skills that can be learned. Part of the skill building comes from exposure to difficult but manageable experiences. And for most people, this time has been manageable. It's not been pleasant. It's been hard, but it's been manageable. And when we experience manageable stresses like this, we get stronger. And we get to dip into that reservoir of resilience for the next stresses that we have. Shankar Vedantam has a great podcast called The Hidden Brain. And he said, each of us has stories in our lives that reflect the fact that the people we are today are not the same people we were a few years ago. We often underestimate our capacity to reinvent ourselves. This is a time of reinvention. All right, how do we endure this? And I know it feels like we're coming to the end of this, right? But still, it's so hard to know. We are running a marathon, but it's not really a marathon because we don't know how long this race is, right? We know a marathon's 26 miles. We don't know how much longer this is. There's something called teleoanticipation, which is when we know what the finish line is, we are constantly adjusting our energy levels to make it there. One of the places that I think this is really interesting is marathon running. That when people run marathons, they're always trying to hit either the 3 hour mark, the 3.5 hour mark, the 4 hour mark. And take a look. These are the number of runners who finish. And look at before the 3 hours, look how many get it. And then right at the end, it drops. Take a look at the 4 hour time, how many people get it right before. Because people, what they're doing is they're constantly saying, in order to get there in 4 hours, this is how much energy I need to give. But we don't know when this ends, so we don't know how much energy we need to give. And the worst case scenario is the false summit. I used to, before my knee got real bad on me, I used to climb a lot of mountains. And one of the things that would be so hard is you'd be climbing a mountain, you have your backpack on, and you get to what looked like a clearing, and it looked like we were getting to the top. It was just around the bend, and you get there and you look up and you see there's a whole nother peak you've got to get to, several hours farther. And you think, oh my goodness, and your energy just drops and you feel discouraged. This is the challenge for us now, is we don't know when this is all going to completely end, do we? The Stockdale Paradox, Admiral Stockdale talked about this. He was a prisoner of war. And he said his observation was that optimistic POWs were the least likely to survive until release. This is not what we expect. Optimism is actually a good thing. It's a healthy thing. But for some reason, for some of these POWs, it ended up being toxic. And what he said is the optimists were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come and go. And then they'd say, well, we're going to be out by Easter, and Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it'd be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. And they actually found this in POW camps and during the Holocaust. He said he approached it differently. He said, I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted that not only would I get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into a defining event in my life, which in retrospect, I would not change. That's how he thought about this. There's something called tragic optimism. And I think that's what the Stockdale Paradox really describes. It's the ability to maintain hope and find meaning in life despite its inescapable pain and loss and suffering. This is not to say we should just ignore those things. We need to be able to hold both truths. That this is an incredible time of pain and suffering and hardship for all of us, and that we can become stronger as a result of it. Both of these things can exist at the same time. There's an article written by a dog musher in Alaska. Her name is Blair Braverman. One of the things she wrote in her article was that she said, my dogs never know how far they're going to race for. And so if I let them run, they would run as hard as they could, and then they would drop at about 30 or 40 miles. She said, but some of these races are 500 miles, some are 1,000 miles. And she said, so what we do is we race for 4 hours, and then we stop and we rest and we eat and we get warm. And then we race again for another 4 hours, and we do the same thing. She said, nobody wants to stop after 4 hours. We still want to keep going. She said, but it's essential that we take care of ourselves. And if we do that, we can run forever. Then she wrote, how long will this pandemic last? Right now, that's irrelevant. What matters is eating a nourishing meal, telling someone you love them, walking your dog, getting enough sleep. What matters is that to the degree you can, you make your own life sustainable every day. And then we can get through this. Even though it seems so close, I want to be sure that if there's a false peak ahead of us, that we're ready, that we live a life that's sustainable every day. Or as Ernest Hemingway says, continue slowly and wait for luck to change. When we look back, what will we see? I like this quote about World War II veterans. Veterans didn't remember World War II with horror. They remembered it with deep nostalgia. It was a time of deep distress, but also a time of profound meaning. It revealed what was truly important, their connections to other people. There was so much movement, so much upheaval, yet through it all, there's a strong sense of belonging, of security, of family. When we look back, we will see meaning in this time, if we can see meaning in it now. And I'll end with this quote by Haruki Murakami. And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. And that's what the storm is all about. We aren't going to be the same people. But if we do this well, we're going to be stronger and more resilient. All right, I'd love to take any questions that you have, any comments or feedbacks. This is the first time I've done this with a group of parents. So if you've got feedback for me, please shoot me an email and let me know. But I'd love to take any questions or feedback that people may have.
Dr. Bolton, on behalf of District 200, we want to thank you for your time. And as a reminder for our community, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. On Tuesday, April 27th, Dr. Bolton is going to join us again for his talk on how can we rebuild. And you can start shooting questions into the box for Ms. Loiacono, and she'll host some questions. But before we do that, we want to remind our parents of a community engagement opportunity. We are looking for your input. We are you as we build our current plans and future plans. Those questions are: what has been learned from this pandemic that we should keep in our school system? And what have kids lost during this altered year of learning? We're using a tool called Thought Exchange. We've put the links right in the chat bar for you. We encourage you to access that. It's completely confidential. Give us your thoughts, and also take some time to rate other people's thoughts. There's a lot of analytics that sit behind that will give us valuable feedback. And without further ado, I'll let any questions that come to Ms. Loiacono, I'll let her pass them on to Dr. Bolton.
We don't have any yet, but maybe I'll start with one question.
Yeah.
Dr. Bolton, sometimes, we can often project our stress onto our own children, and maybe if you can offer some tips or strategies on, you shared that one mindfulness activity, but any other strategies or suggestions you can offer for us parents on how to cool our jets when our kids are stressing us out on top of everything else we have going on?
Yeah, I think that stress, I like to call it our dysregulation, our emotional dysregulation, is really contagious. When my kids are dysregulated, I am quickly dysregulated. When I'm dysregulated, I will quickly dysregulate everybody else in my house. And so part of it, I think, is knowing, there are a couple things I would say. The first is we need to think about patterns in our stress. There may be certain times of day that are hard. For me, one of the things I noticed is I got really cranky with people when I would come home. And I realized that I was really, really, really hungry. And I don't do well when I'm hungry. And so I needed to have a snack before I came home. That something as simple as that was an important shift for me. I also realized that I'm pretty cranky at night. When I'm right before I go to bed, that's not a time to have a hard conversation with my college-age son. So I realized that's a conversation. If I need to have a conversation, I need to do it with him in the morning. So there's part of it is what's an awareness of ourselves, and both what makes us upset. If I notice myself getting upset, making sure I've got a way of stepping out. When I would get in arguments with my son, I finally realized, okay, I just need to leave, because he and I would just get locked in, and I just need to leave. But then I would just leave, but I wouldn't tell him why I was leaving. And that felt terrible to him. And he was able to tell me that. And what I realized is I needed to say, I need to take a break. We'll talk about this when I get back, but I'm not in a place where I can really talk about this right now. The problem with dysregulation is there's a sense of urgency that we have, that we've got to have that discussion now. We've got to get the last word in, whatever it is. And what we need to do is we need to be aware that nothing good happens from a dysregulated conversation. And so then the work is, how can I step away from it, right? How can I get myself out of it? For me, that was my strategy. For some people, it might be, going out and gardening for a few minutes. Other people, it might be listening to music, taking a walk by the lake, whatever it may be. I live in Evanston, so I can walk by the lake. So, but these are some of the things that I would do. But I would increase your self-awareness, and then I would really think through what's your coping strategy going to be, and let other people in your family know that that's what you do when you're stressed, because then it becomes a model for how can your kids do the same thing. How can they notice when they're stressed? And then how can they use a strategy to help themselves calm down?
It's interesting you say that. One of the things that I had to implement on a personal level is I work less than 5 minutes where I pick up my children after work. And so sometimes I'll take a quick loop to buffer the time before I leave work, or after I leave work before I pick up my kids. And I appreciate that.
Exactly. I really believe that having that buffer between work and home is important. And I also think that's one of the reasons why COVID was so stressful, when everybody's working from home, and many people still may be, this lack of a boundary between work and home is really hard. And I would tell some people, take a walk around the block when you're done with work, right? Get outside for a little while, and make these routines so that there's a buffer, both for your mind and your body, between now is work and now is family time, or now is home time.
Can you talk about, there's a question in the chat bar about how to help your children deal with remote work and lack of socialization with other children, and just how do you help your child who's feeling stressed out and possibly that remote work and lack of socialization is contributing to it?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could be going on with this. So I'll talk about it. I'll talk about it broadly. You know, I was listening to the radio today, and a teenager said that, and this is not all teenagers, but they said that they were that even though they weren't at school, they were finding themselves closer to their family members, to their siblings. One of the things is that if you don't have access to friends, then making sure there may be some things that we can do as parents to connect with our kids in different ways. It may be that we need to go out of our way to do things that our kids like to do that we may not like to do typically, but making sure that we can be a relationship for them. The other piece I wonder about is, you know, remote connections with friends is not ideal, but it's also better than no connections. And so if she's lost connections with friends, really working with her to figure out how can we help you develop reestablish connections with people that you haven't seen as much. And that's something I've really noticed in myself, is that there are a lot of people that I'm no longer as connected to. And I realize when I'm feeling tired or discouraged that that I need to be much more intentional about reaching out to people that I've lost touch with. And then finally, I think the stress piece, I do think that there's something very unique about being on the computer all day. It's exhausting. My hope is that part of what we can do is get kids outside more, giving them more outdoor breaks. The more we can get kids outside, the better. And it really does reset a lot of things in our body. Movement and outdoor movement are as powerful as antidepressants and anti-anxiety for many kids. And so I would say that that's the other piece that I would say is how can we get our kids outside and active as much as we can.
Absolutely. I think it was such a tease this weekend, right? Saturday, the weather was so beautiful and got to be outside, and then Sunday came. We got another question. You referenced getting outside, physical activity is a way to help decrease stress or to regulate. There's a parent who's asked a question in the chat bar. Any strategies? She's saying that her middle schooler kind of goes from a 0 to a 10 very quickly. And as a parent, she's feeling a little helpless. And what are some strategies to help your child regulate aside from going outside?
So I've got a book. I've got a book for you. Erica, can you put this in the chat? Stuart Shanker, Shanker, and the book is called Self-Reg. This is like my new favorite book, and really it gets at exactly what this parent's talking about. The thing that we want to understand, there are two things that I want to share about this, and I could go on for a long time about this. The first thing is that this is stress behavior. When kids struggle, it's stress behavior, and we often make it into a misbehavior, and then we use punishments or we try and use incentives. But at the end of the day, it's really stress behavior. There's something that's stressing them, and then we threaten them with a punishment, and then they become even more stressed instead of less stressed. And so what we want to do is we want to be really curious about why this is so stressful for them now. And sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's not. And as kids get older and they hit middle school and high school, they keep it to themselves more, perhaps. So it's watching for patterns. But what we want to do is see, okay, I wonder what was stressful for them now. And then again, I would say the key thing is having them recognize that they're stressed and figuring out what's helpful for them when they're stressed, and then engage in that behavior, engage in putting your AirPods in, going out and getting on the trampoline outside, um, um, going for walking the dog. That when kids want to be more relaxed, and what we want them to do is experience a sense of calm and give them the sense that they can achieve that calm. So that's the first piece. The other thing is, again, it helps when we are doing the same thing, when they're watching us do the same thing. That's also helpful. The second piece of this that I think is also important, and I really navigated this with my son much more than my daughter, is there's a piece of this that's about development. The part of our brain that manages emotional regulation is the prefrontal cortex. And I think we're going to talk about this more in the next talk, so this will just be a little tease. But the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until we're in our late 20s. And so these are skills that our kids are going to begin to develop these skills more and more. My daughter, it came much easier for her. I think she had these skills coming out of the womb. My son, however, very different. He really didn't start, I didn't start seeing these skills come up until he was later on in high school, 17 and 18. And so what I want to be able to share with you is, just because they're struggling with this now doesn't mean they'll always struggle with it, but we've got to help them. Stress increases stress slows down the development of that part of our brain. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to reduce the stress in their lives in those moments. And I'm not saying completely take stress away, but help them cope with the stresses as they come up, but not add stress through punishment or shaming or the things that we typically do. You're not going to be able to go on this trip if you don't do X, Y, and Z. When we start doing those things, we're adding the stress. What we want them to do is learn how to cope with that by identifying strategies and then implementing those strategies.
There's a parent who's asked about that her daughter's dealing with a lot of anxiety and is having a hard time making it through a day full of school. Can you offer any specific suggestions for mindfulness or meditation practices that they could do together?
Oh, I like that. There's so many. Mindfulness is. I had a couple of different thoughts. I was going to go a different way with this. So, but first of all, I love the mindfulness, the idea of mindfulness, and everybody has different ways that they like to do mindfulness, different things that they feel comfortable with. So I would, if you just go online and take a look at for mindfulness for children. I'm not sure if your child's an adolescent or a younger kid, but and then I love the idea of you guys doing this together. You might have a mindful activity first thing in the morning. If they're older, there's a website that I really like, and I think this is free. So if you want to put this one down too, Erica, it's the website is Sounds True.
Sounds True, SOUNDSTRUE.
Yep, if you just Google Sounds True and Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock, BRACH. They have and I believe it's still free, a 40 session mindfulness activity. So what they do is they talk about mindfulness for 5 minutes and then they lead you an activity for 5 minutes. That's one that I like, but there's so many out there. But the other thing I would say is I would work. I think that for many kids, asking them to sit in front of a computer for that long is exhausting, and they just need more breaks. And some kids can handle it. My daughter can. My son would struggle. And so I guess what I would say is that for your daughter, I would work with the teachers to say, is there a way that she can step away from the computer for a certain amount of time? I'm not sure how old your child is, and I'm not sure how this all works, but getting breaks is, we need to reset our brains several times a day, especially when we're on Zoom. So I would say taking breaks, especially outside, not on their phone, away from technology, and maybe with you. I think that the other thing is having it be social, but not on technology, is really important.
And I think that so following this tonight's workshop, we will send out the link to the rest of our community, but that also I'm getting some questions about resources for mindfulness and meditation activities. So I will work with Dr. Sloggy and Dr. Bolton to put together maybe a little bit of a resource bank that we can share out with parents in an upcoming Wellness Wednesday communication. Another question in the chat, can you share any strategies for dealing with compassion fatigue?
Yeah, I think that the first is can we give ourselves breaks? I guess, and when we talk about compassion fatigue as a parent, I think one of the things that's hardest as parents, and we talked about this a little bit in the first talk, is this idea that we are our own worst critics, and we believe we need to be present for our kids at all times. And one of the things that really has changed about parenting in the last generation or two has been that we provide more supervision for our kids than parents have ever provided. That there's this sense that we need to be with them all the time. And I think it's very important that you figure out how you get breaks. And if I'm not sure if you've got younger kids, it's trickier. And so finding ways of sharing this. I think that or making sure that you're getting breaks with kids in the house in a way that's safe. But the important thing for all of us when we hit that fatigue, really, that's we lose empathy, we lose the ability to focus, we are exhausted. And so it's really telling us we need to take care of ourselves. So I would, in addition to some of the strategies around doing journaling, I think that can be helpful, connecting these things to values. So thinking about what are your values as a parent? How are those showing up? That can help. Okay, so that's number one, making sure that the stress that you're experiencing, you're also experiencing the meaning part of that, because making your kid dinner when they don't feel like eating or they don't like what you cooked can be really, really stressful. But in that moment, teaching them as best you can how to navigate when you don't like something that's come your way, dealing with disappointment, those kinds of things. You're teaching them that as well as trying to give them nourishment. So I think making sure that doing some journaling, I think, can be helpful. Taking breaks, even if they're small breaks, but ensuring that you're taking breaks. Our kids are more independent than we give them credit for much of the time. That's been one of the discoveries by many parents and many school districts, is that our kids are more independent than we've given them credit for. They can do more things on their own. And so let's let them do those things on their own so we have some time on our own as well.
Okay, I just put out a minute or two ago, last call for questions. So if you want your question to remain private, you're welcome to chat that to me directly. So the question will go directly to me. And like I said, we will put together a resource bank for parents in our upcoming Wellness Wednesday email. There's a question here, Dr. Bolton, talking about how just being like maybe a stay-at-home parent, there's often not really a lot of, it's not always an environment where you get a lot of positive feedback. It's always negative feedback, and it can be difficult when you're not feeling a lot of sense of accomplishment. So can you talk a little bit about like how to kind of work through that?
Yeah, that's really a beautiful question. It's a profound question and a really hard one. I'll tell you where and I'm not sure, if you've got a spouse that's not appreciating you, if you don't feel like your kids are appreciating you, I guess
I think
that's
it's both.
yeah. So what I would say, so the therapist in me says that sitting down, when you are emotionally regulated, right? The times that we typically have these conversations are when we're not regulated. I think it's important that you and your spouse come together to talk about what your needs are and how hard this is. But you both have to be emotionally regulated. It can't be when you are, it can't be after a comment that makes you feel unappreciated and then you snap, or it can't be when your spouse is struggling, but take some time. Set the stage for a conversation to say, to talk about what's really hard for you. The hope is, my guess is that will trigger their stress response. And as long as we aren't saying it in a way that says, um, that diminishes the other person's contribution, then can we have a conversation and trigger their befriend response with us? So that's one piece. I guess the other piece again, is it comes down to development. Our kids, our hope is not that however old your kids are, that will be how they will be for the rest of their lives, but that in your moments of stress with them, you're teaching them how to navigate stress. And in their moments, and just because they are not grateful now doesn't mean that they won't be grateful or grow up as ungrateful kids. Part of the work is really understanding that they will, and they haven't figured out how to navigate that social skill yet, how to be regulated themselves so they can do it. So continuing to have faith. And that's where I do think that connecting to the values can be important. Being able to say that even though my value is that I'm going to raise kids who are good to other people, maybe that's one of your values. And then you say, even though my child wasn't good to me in the way I'd like them to have been today, I helped coach them. And I believe that coaching will help them be better to people later on in life. And it's interesting, that's one of the conversations that I had with my son. He said, because I kept sharing my values with him, he kept struggling to implement them, right? And so I shared it, and what he said years later was, those conversations were really helpful. I couldn't do it then, but knowing what your values are and knowing that I shared those values, and now he's really able to do it. Sometimes better than me, which gets a little bit embarrassing sometimes. But I guess that those are some of the thoughts that I have for that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bolton, and thank you to all of our community members that joined us tonight. Please make sure to mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 27th at 7 o'clock for our third and final parent workshop for this school year. Please, if you're in conversations with other community members, attending the first two sessions is not a prerequisite to attend the third, that you can still attend the third and get a lot of great valuable information even if you weren't able to make it to the first or second. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Bolton, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you.